meet my bride. Let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile. Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. As a kid, I remember reading about the Battle of the Marne and how over 10,000 Parisian taxis saved the day and moved an entire army up to the front lines. It's an impressive tale of how the automobile played such an important part in military logistics, and I was always fascinated by it. But is that what happened? Well, yes, French taxis did play a part in that battle, but was their role really that important? And today we'll look at the legend and the truth of the role of the car in the Battle of the Marne. Here's what I learned about this over 40 years ago. World War I began in late July of 1914. The Central Powers were initially successful in their campaigns, which they called the Schlieffen Plan, and overran the Netherlands and Belgium in a push to reach the prize of Paris, France, and end the conflict quickly. The first major battles of the war were central victories, and the Entente, or Allied powers of France, Britain, and other such, were getting quite the bloody nose. The Allied troops had been retreating from these battles in an orderly fashion into France, and General Joseph Joffre led the way in the Great Retreat. The retreat was good news for the Central Commander, General Helmuth von Moltke, though some in his staff noted that this appeared to be well planned and not the action of a routed and scattered army. Indeed, Joffre was preparing his defenses and opportunities to strike back a bit east of Paris along the River Marne. The battle began on September 6, 1914. Joffre attacked the Germans and had some success, but Moltke counterattacked and things were looking quite troublesome. And so the following night, every taxi in Paris, most of them being the very popular Renault Type AG, which was produced from 1905 to 1910, shuffled some 10,000 troops from Paris to the front lines. The army paid the fares, and the flank was reinforced, denying a breakout to the Germans. Yeah, that's the story I learned as a kid. There's some truth to it, but let's back up a bit and take a closer look. Close to 2 million men fought in this battle, and the scope of the entire engagement, which lasted for 9 days, is far larger than this particular event within it. But on the night of September 7th, here's what was going on. The French Sixth Army was under the command of General Michel-Joseph Manoury. His job was to keep the line and defend Paris, or even advance if the opportunity arose. And behind him was General Joseph Gallieni. Gallieni was a career officer in the French army. He had recently retired with honors, but was called back to service to be the military governor of Paris. And when the Germans were coming, he looked at the situation and decided that Joffre and Manoury would need more men. This man knew his stuff and had gone out a couple of days prior to inspect the eastern defenses, as the Germans were sighted in the area, and so an attack from that quarter was expected. The enemy was barely 30 miles from Paris, and the farmlands that flanked the Marne were particularly vulnerable. Gallieni correctly assumed that the Germans would attempt a rapid encirclement at that point, and so that particular flank would need reinforcement now. And so he arranged to bring more troops from Paris up to the front. And one of the methods he chose was to garnish every taxicab he could find in Paris to do their part. At the time, there were about 7,000 of them or so in operation in the city and its surrounds, just about every one of them being a Renault Type AG1 Landaulet. These were not fast cars, but quite reliable. 1.1-liter vertical twin-cylinder engine, putting out about 8 horsepower, and could cruise at about 20 miles per hour. Each of these taxis could carry 5 people, and on the night of September 7th, around 1,400 of them or so, accounts vary as to the specific numbers, trundled to the Paris military compound and began to shuttle soldiers east to reinforce the French Sixth Army 30 miles away. This was the middle of the night, and the drivers were none too happy about it, but they were promised to be paid their fares, a bit over 70,000 francs when it was all said and done. But about 5,000 men and their gear were moved by taxi that night to the front. This was a rather flamboyant thing for Gallieni to do, but it was, in the scheme of the battle itself, far overshadowed by the men and supplies that were also hurried to the front via trucks and trains. The soldiers got a nice taxi ride, but were in reserve for most of the battle, as they were brought forward to that position just in case they were needed. Thankfully for the Allies, they were not. General Kluck, who was one of the central commanders pursuing the French, made a critical error and opened a gap in his line. Joffre took advantage of this, and soon it would be the Germans in retreat. Although the taxis themselves did not play a critical role in the battle, the spectacle of it all made for good press, and so the French newspapers reported with much enthusiasm on how the people of Paris, their own taxi drivers, helped secure the first major victory for the Allies in World War I. It would be some time before the generals involved admitted that the role of these taxi cabs was minor in and of itself and was very exaggerated. But at the time, it wasn't what those Parisian taxis did to affect the battle that mattered. It was the fact that they did it. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.